Hello and welcome to this very special annual NASSCOM Autocar Professional Roundtable discussion involving industry captains as well as senior representatives from NASSCOM. So we all know we are in the midst of a disruptive era, and in the midst of these disruptions that we are witnessing across all sectors, particularly in the automotive and mobility industries as well, now there is a bigger challenge or an additional challenge, so to speak, of the global coronavirus pandemic. But as they say, the winners are those who find opportunities in the midst of challenges. On that note, we will discuss today on the opportunities and scope that are there in the global ER&D industry and the trends that are taking shape in various sectors, primarily the automotive sector. So without further ado, let me introduce the panelists of today's roundtable discussion. We have Mr. Ajay Prabhu, President Technology Services at Quest Global, Mr. K.S. Viswanathan, Vice President, Industry Initiatives at NASSCOM, Mr. Kishore Patil, CEO, KPIT Technologies, Mr. Samir Yagnik, Executive Director at Tektra EV, and last but not least, Mr. Manu Saleh, Managing Director at Mercedes-Benz R&D India. Gentlemen, thank you very much for spending your time and joining in this annual roundtable discussion. It's my pleasure to host, and I hope everyone is doing well, and best wishes for your safety and good health. And on that note, first of all, let me come to you, Mr. Viswanathan. In this current scenario, could you just draw a brief picture of what the scenario is currently in India and in the global stage as well? And in that scenario, how can India reinvent itself as a destination for innovative solutions?
Thank you, Shumantra. Even 30 years back, when NASSCOM was writing his vision statement, etc., the key personal point we mentioned was, how does India emerge as a trustworthy partner for the global service player, the global ecosystem? If I say in the current scenario, in the last 5 months, 6 months episode, the trustworthiness factor of India as a capability center for global IT solution, especially engineering solution, has gone manifold. Never in we won't believe it, but the time the lockdown was announced, within a span of 24 days, almost close about 4 million people were moved to work from their home. Close about 2 million assets we moved them from office environment to home office environment. And we, in a span of about, say, 22 days, business came near business as usual for more than 90% of the customers at 90% of the time, all the time. All of them completely demonstrated, whichever way you call it, the innovative prowess of India as a country to respond to a challenging customer situation. Completely transformed. Reinforce the need for trust as a factor. I have no hesitation to say, if I had to look at several multinational corporations, several other industry segments doing it, the trust factor of Indian industry has certainly gone up in the global era. And it has also led to many service providers increasing their businesses, several logos added on their customers in the last 5 months. Last 5 months also brought versatility into the businesses where you're not meeting the customer. You're not meeting the customer. Everything is virtual. Delivery is virtual. Talking to the customer is virtual. And that has tremendously increased the amount of talk time that's available between customer and the suppliers. And there's also increased the confidence and trust that is required. As I speak to you, in the Indian economy perspective also, on March 12, 22nd, there's a complete despair. What is it going to be the scenario? Your Q1 end results that came in June, July was any indicative. Even some of the companies present in this room, it was not so much disheartening. But as I see that as we go forward, the entire Indian industry is cautiously optimistic. If the virus were to just get contained and the Q2 business continues as it is being done, the Q1 is very likely that we'll have a recovery phase much faster than what we're essential for. So on the whole, industry is in recovery. On the whole, the trust factor is very, very high. On the whole, India is a capability center for the global world, especially engineering, say it has gone up several notches up.
Thank you. And just wanted to understand, if I'm not wrong, the ER&D industry size is about 32 billion US dollars. Now, which are the areas where the Indian ER&D industry is really betting big, and in the near to midterm, what is the role you expect the automotive sector to play in this?
Fine. The Indian asset ER&D, global ER&D, India is a microcosm of that. We serve what 11 sub-verticals: semiconductor, automobile, telecommunication, industrial machinery, construction heavy engineering, aerospace, healthcare, ICT, energy, medical devices, like 11 sub-verticals. The top one is, of course, all of them coincidentally are interlinked. Semiconductor, telecom, and automobile together account for close to about, say, 56% of the total revenue that is spent globally and also in India, right? So there is individual split available. I can share that with you, 56%. Aerospace, construction and machinery equipment, industrial machinery occupy for another 24%. So 80% is contributed by close about this 6 segment which is there. I expect the same trend to continue. There is an uptake in healthcare services, the uptake in energy services, notwithstanding the oil prices crash, as decarbonization is going to pick up. We are all committed to the decarbonization norms which have been identified is going to lead it. Automobile, lots, as someone said, in the digitization effort in the world, is it contributed by CTO or CIO or a COVID? The COVID has just generally has accelerated the drive towards digitization, including in aerospace. Put together in 3 to 5 years' time, the recovery will be much faster, much sharper, double head engine driving the power. So currently, it's semiconductor, telecom, automobile continues to be the drivers. Energy and healthcare is 2 new things which has got added.
Okay. Thank you for giving that picture, showing that picture to us. Talking about automotive, Manu, I'd like to come to you. I mean, Mercedes-Benz R&D has really showcased its capabilities over the years, and in the very recent past, you have the MBUX system that you have not put in your cars. Much of it was developed in India, but from what Mr. Vishwanathan said, in terms of as that digitization happens and these trends of electrification and connected vehicles, what scope do you see, or what level of innovation and technology development are taking place, and going forward, not necessarily limited only to Mercedes-Benz only, but India as an Indian ER&D companies, what's the place you see for them in the global stage?
Thank you, Sumantra. I think we had interacted in the past when MBUX was launched in India and discussed the role of software in automobiles in general, but also the role that the Indian engineers, Indian talent and ecosystem can play in a product like that. Just to summarize the way we look at a car right now, Ola, our global CEO, is usually describing the car, meanwhile, as a software product on wheels. And I think that says a lot about the dependence on software in the upcoming view on how OEMs want to pitch mobility to the world, right? Moving from point A to point B in a product that you want to keep on refreshing over time, turn it into a gift that keeps on giving after buying a car, is, I think, a completely new concept compared to the past where you just bought a piece of metal and rubber and it stayed like it did. While there is a lot of focus on customer related functions and what software can bring as an on top value added layer for it, now this naturally plays into the amount of software that would go into an automobile like that, the talent that you need for that, and simply India's demographic and competence positioning in this whole space, right? And if we meet, say 2 years down the line, we'd be talking only software probably out of India centers of most automobiles. So it is like I saw the brief from Vishwanathan as part of this call, while there is a conscious attempt from the ER&D circles at NASSCOM, Ajay will tell you about that, for the government and for the industry to look at ER&D away from IT, and I support that fully. On the other hand, ER&D has the same potential as IT because software, as a generic term, is playing a very strong role in redefining products. Now, if it means talking about product like we did just now, car on software product on wheels, or even sustainability, that was part of our pre-discussions today, wherein digital and digital engineering will play a major role in redefining the entire product. I see companies like ours and the ecosystem like India with major suppliers who are sitting on this call and big companies and brands sitting on this call, all to have a major contribution in redefining this product in the next years. So automotive seems to have, if after the pandemic goes away, a renewed sense of vigor in terms of using digital and software to redefine the way we are looking at mobility per se. You're on mute, Sumantra.
That brings me to Mr. Prabhu. Like Manu said, I mean, ER&D has to be looked at independent of the IT industry as a whole. And with the kind of developments that are happening and the potential scope, that's there for the Indian industry to tap, what kind of initiatives do you think the industry expects, or the support from the government in terms of giving it the recognition and perhaps the kind of deserving support, if any? What's the kind of support you're getting now, and is there anything that you think the industry can do to kind of help the government can do in order to help industry players really play to their full potential and bring India take up India in the global scale?
Yeah. Sumantra, thank you for that question. Maybe let me put a context to why engineering is different from IT. So engineering basically, maybe has like a history of 150 years, way before the first silicon chip or a computer was invented. So it finds its roots in the industrial age when maybe the first steam turbines, steam engines and things like that got invented, right? Then the railroads, then the airplanes, and then the cars, and then there is a lot of industrial machinery that runs the world. So there is a lot of operational technology that's been run far before the computers were ever invented. And then the computers came along, then the software came along, and over the last maybe 30 years, there has been a convergence of that engineering field, more and more adopting the benefits and the productivity that the computer age, the computation kind of brings. So it is very, very distinct. And if you look around, a lot of the things that engineers have delivered to the humanity comes from the engineering side of things, whether it's a car or a train or and there is a lot that we don't see, big ships and cargo that's moving around. So power being generated from various different ways. So, and say mines, for example, there's a lot of industrialists. So there is a lot of engineering that is going on, and that's quite distinct from IT. So that I think is very, very important. Now, if we think of ourselves as a country that is going to be by 2050, let's say the third largest economy. Now, are we just going to be a software-based country, or are we also going to do all these other things that is required, and are we going to become good at least some of those things, right? So, so I think there has to be a conscious effort to make sure that we excel at engineering. So when we talk about Atmanirbhar, it's very important for us to think more broadly about becoming fairly independent in many different facets of what it takes to be the third largest economy in the world, and not have too much dependence on many things. For example, aerospace, can we make our own planes? Can we make our own high-speed trains? I mean, many things that are required to move the nation, right? So I think the first and foremost, that recognition has to come. I think it is.
Sorry, is that recognition there from the government currently, in your view?
I think that is growing nowadays. I see more talk about trying to kind of do some, and especially many of the states are taking a proactive approach. They are leading to even talking about creating exclusive ER&D policies for the state. And I hope some of those will come out. I think in our summit, in fact, I think there was there a announcement, KSV?
Yes, yes. Government of Karnataka has said by end December, hopefully they'll come with that India's country's first ER&D policy.
Okay.
So,
on that note, both Ajay and Mr. Vishwanath, if you can just what would you expect in a what would you expect in a well-designed policy? Or what would it take for any policy to be a very well-designed and really fruitful one, which can really enhance the industry's capabilities?
Sumantara, I'll complete your first question, maybe my response, and then KSV can add. So first is to recognize, and we are seeing some green shoots, at least at the state level, and I believe those conversations will lead more to the entire country level. Okay, and other thing is that to kind of know that we can't at once get great at everything, or every place cannot become an expert in everything, because there is like 150 years of legacy knowledge and expertise. So what I think we should do as a country is to pick a few spots where we have a relative advantage, an existing base of competence, and ability to kind of try and become the best in the world, one of the maybe top 3 in the world, and then put focused energy behind that. So ER&D Council over the last couple of years has really worked hard coming up with what are these areas that we could actually be good at, we have a chance at becoming good at. And those areas, what we would really love to see the government try and do is this concept of innovation super clusters. Okay, this is the concept where what we would like is a more of a top-down approach of creating certain regions, certain maybe cities, where each one of these areas can become a cluster, and that cluster should have university, it should have the private companies, it should have the government labs, it should have investors, as well as startups. Okay, all of these together encouraged by a top-down authority. And we are requesting for an innovation authority to be kind of set up that will govern these, say, 4 or 5 super clusters, innovation clusters. And that would be, I think, the best way we could really kind of create that future. Apart from that, we want really the government to be very, very welcoming for the business. The fact is that of the 2,000 largest engineering spenders, only about 50% are doing something in India, whether through their own offices, their own engineering offices, or through some partners. So that's a vast opportunity waiting for us out there. Of the top 200, only 75% are in India, 25% are not. Why not? Because there is so much advantage to be had. So what do we need to do to encourage more of these to come here? And there are certain things, if Manu, for example, has a lot of pain around certain things, especially related to the clarity of taxation. Okay, there would be a great advance in the country that will really kind of encourage more of Manus to do more of things in India, and that only means good for all of the country if there is clarity and simplicity about a taxation structure. Okay, so some of these members of ER&D are like pretty much every year getting tax notice, and they've been open for 10 years, 12 years. So not only we need ease of doing business, we also need peace of doing business. There is no peace in doing business when you have like, tens of years of tax notices sitting on something simple that could be sorted. So there are requests like that also that we are trying to put and highlight at the government level to clean up. So maybe KSB, you can add any other?
Yeah, the two things, Shumantro, the twofold. One is to get, how do we get more and more FDI into ER&D business into India is one of the big goals, which is going to outcome as a good ER&D policies is being worked out both at central government level as well as the state government level. State government level is done. Second is, as Ajay alluded, how do we do ease of doing IP and cost of doing IP? Both of them, if they are simplified, what could be done? And third, more importantly, that you develop an ER&D policy for the present to augment the capacity, or alternatively, identify 3 or 4 technology, bet yourself on 3 or 4 technologies, say the next 15 to 20 years, this is going to make a difference. Maybe say batteries as a technology, maybe electric vehicles as a technology, maybe advanced manufacturing as an area of looking at it. Like that, identified, put the entire, today what is happening is the pockets of excellence exist in everywhere. It's a great work done by industry, startups is doing something, academia doing, between academia, again, good work being done, but none of them is getting accumulated together as one composite entity. So can we create as what we call super clusters of innovation? Super clusters of innovation, pick up, put your bets. You cannot be choosing all the segments together. Pick your test, maybe create a chief innovation authority. And this is the plan which is being worked out at the central government, state government. Very enthusiastic support, very enthusiastic support at the highest level, what needs to be done. And we are confident the government is now looking at, again, you talked about Atmanirbhar. In the past, it was again say made in India. Now they're saying is also make in India. Now they're saying made in India for the global world. So the element of design also is being brought into it. All of them put together in the right direction. It takes time, but we are in the right direction.
Well said there. And talking about the opportunities and also in terms of the strengths of ER&D, Kishore, your company has made a lot of progress, and I've been tracking it for many years. Your Revolo project is one example. But now you have really expanded your reach overseas as well. Tell us from your experience, what are the key key segments in the ER&D, and that could be the big drivers for not only companies like KPIT, but also give other Indian enterprises a lot of opportunities and really scale up.
Thanks, Mantra. I think, let me start from where Manu mentioned. I think there is a huge change, right? I think it's basically software on wheels. I'm just looking from automotive and I'll move to the other sectors. I think there are 3 to 4 major things, and I feel we should look at building on our strengths, what India has already established. So the first is software, right, which has been established as a strength, and now that becoming very relevant. I would say the soul of a vehicle. There, I think there are 3-4 major changes which are happening. One is the cloud transformation is a huge opportunity. All the things which were basically sitting in the car, a lot of things which are happening in terms of moving things to cloud, software being updated remotely, and the data, artificial intelligence. So all these things are coming into the vehicle. I think that's a huge opportunity, and specifically it's a change of architecture. What needs to be done, however, is as Ajay mentioned, and see, basically the difference between IT and I would say software here is there is a huge part of embedded part, and it is very domain specific also. So you need a very if I have to say deeper software skills, little different than the pure IT skills, and then also the domain knowledge. I think it is very critical. So that's a huge opportunity, and the one important reason for this is because of the role of software in the vehicles. I think most of the automotive companies want to own their software, They want to do a lot of things their software, and they need a partner. Specifically after the COVID situation, there is increased realization in terms of doing it, scaling it up, doing it at a right cost, and really focusing on the competency. So I think that's a huge opportunity I see. In my view, it applies to, as KSV mentioned, semiconductor, telecom. These are also very connected part. These are more, I would say, more like going across the other segment, whether it is automotive, medical, and all other vehicles, because it has to do with the connectivity, it has to do with the diagnostic, it has to do with the fundamental platform. So semiconductor, telecom will be a huge opportunity, and it will play in different domains. Of course, aerospace, I believe, will also change. It will come back, of course, and it's a big opportunity. Medical, I think, will be a big opportunity. I think, and if you really look at it, this may also expedite the current situation, may also expedite that. So these are the different things which are opportunities are there. So this is a combination of two things, I feel. One is a deep domain knowledge about this sector, and the second is deep software knowledge and embedded knowledge, architecture knowledge, and cloud transformation for this kind of technology, which is a bit different than what we have been doing into IT. And just to add one point, which I guess Ajay mentioned earlier a little bit, from the government perspective of this, I think, in my opinion, the biggest infrastructure we need is the skills which are so deep. So I think that is a very critical, because we see that the computer, basically the skills which we have coming from the college, it needs to be of the top-notch level in this area. So right. I guess that's what I would do.
Indeed, skilling will be very crucial. Yeah. One quick answer from you, Kishore. You in embedded technologies, KPIT has had a long history, and yes. Now you are really, advancing it to the next level. What are the, could you just without kind of disturbing any of the NDAs, can you tell us what kind of next level cutting edge technologies that or features that we can expect? Maybe some of them facilitated by KPIT.
So I mean, it is it's all about innovation, and it is in line with what the industry segments are. I think let me just take one or two examples, and maybe we'll move on that. But I think one is this cloud transformation is very critical. I think it will need a different architecture for embedded systems to be put in and making it efficient. I think that along with that, the basic operating systems across this domain is going to be important. But coming to your specific points, I think there is a lot of localization which is required in most of these technologies. So I'll give you one example. Autonomous cars are very important globally. We believe that one simple feature we creating for India is like an inch movement, because the traffic is so difficult for large vehicles like buses, trucks, etc. The speed for which many of these technologies are made outside are like 60, 80 as average.
May not be relevant for India.
It's not India. It is 25, 30. So you can bring out very specific different technologies for that. Or the second thing which we have actually brought in the market is, for example, two-wheeler navigation and connectivity, which is very important, because a lot of logistics which is happening in India is, as you know, I mean, everywhere, but Amazon or whatever, the last mile delivery is that. And there you do not have these technologies specifically made for this vehicle. So very smart solutions which can help, because even 1 minute saved or 2 minutes saved in delivery is very important.
Right. Indeed. And I think the food delivery business will drive, would be a good consumer in that in these features, I guess. Samir, coming to you, electrification, this whole global electrification trend has also triggered the entry of a whole lot of players with a non-automotive background, because generally speaking, the entry barrier compared to the ICE industry is much lower in the electric vehicles. Also, it's less complex, but not necessarily easier. It's also technologically quite intensive. But while that happens, maybe there'll be some of the players which we are seeing maybe filtered out over the years, depending on their technical capabilities. My question to you is, this whole electrification trend, does it also give companies like Electra EV and other Indian players to really make them mark in the global industry, and thereby brand India also, polish brand India also in that scenario, given that the entire global industry is in a way, in varying degrees, at a learning stage when it comes to these mega trends of connected vehicles, autonomous vehicles, or electrification.
Thanks, Sumantra, and I'm happy to be here with you. I'll address that. It's a very interesting question, and I have a very specific example, and I'd like to talk about that if you have the patience. But I'd just like to address some of the other issues first. If you're solving people problems, then you are sustainable. What are people problems? Today, climate change, and particularly the amount of carbon that we use. And that's where this whole electrification justification is coming from. That look, the traffic is choking people, and we need to go towards electrification. The other one is, look what happened with the pandemic. So healthcare, and India will be great at frugal healthcare. Indian agriculture is a huge part of our GDP. So agri-tech is a focus area. Now, coming to electrification, I am extremely happy that the central government steps through Niti Aayog that has happened through FAME 1 and now FAME 2 incentives has taken this huge kind of a start towards electrification. It's like a slow takeoff. Today, it's merely less than 0.2% of the sales of cars happens in electrified cars in India, albeit there are early starters. There are people like MG, Tata Motors, of course, and others, Hyundai, who've come into the market. But there are two dimensions, and I'll address your specific question in a second. One is the supply side, and the government is doing quite a bit to ensure that we become Atmanirbhar. They've come out with a phase-wise manufacturing plan that ensures that whatever we deliver in the powertrain, people like Electra EV and larger OEMs are actually, making it in India. And the other one is the demand side. And the demand side really is dependent on your charging infrastructure, the GST, which has now come down, the Delhi new electrification policy, which is hugely kind of positive. It gives additional incentives for not only fleets, but also individual owners of EVs. So I think it's beginning to take off, and somebody said it rightly that the tip-off point is 5%. When 5% of your cars are selling, which are electrified cars or EVs, then you probably come to a point where you can think about scaling. Now, the role of smaller companies, role of new companies, that's what you asked. What I'm witnessing is that electrified cars has far less number of parts, as we all know. And there are even the requirements in India specifically are very specific to, people are coming out with very niche requirements, such as somebody's come out with a concept called Scenics for doctors. So all the fleet only purely does it for doctors, takes them safely from their home to the hospital. So there's a huge latent demand for a large amount of fleet for a very niche requirement. And there are 4, 5, 6, 7 requirements such as this. You know that the entire three-wheeler segment is a disorganized segment where people are bringing in existing three-wheelers and they're coming out and swapping ICEs with swappable batteries, etc. But I won't go there. Just focusing on just the latent requirement of fleet. In my observation, there are at least a half a dozen companies who want to get in and become an OEM, quite like what Mr. Tata had once predicted when he came out with the Nano, that the manufacturing processes will be far easier. You'll find people who are with smaller outfits will be able to create cars. And with electrifications, particularly in India, you are now seeing that there are these ambitious companies who have requirements for 10 to 100,000 vehicles for a specific niche who are coming into the fray. So what we are trying to do, first and foremost, competency exists in India. Through the GCCs, through the Robert Bosches of the world, or through the KPITs of the world, or Tata Technologies, or whoever you have, competency in EV exists in India. They're being applied through technology, connected technology, machine learning and others to world markets. Now, it is our objective to first crack problems which are relevant for India. Problems which are last mile problems, two-wheeler problems, three-wheeler, four-wheeler problems that are relevant for India. So what we are seeing is we are trying to marry, literally my job is literally marrying people who have a requirement for, let's say, 100,000 vehicles to companies who not necessarily want to electrify, but they've got great products. People who have gliders. Gliders are those, the chassis minus the ICE, that they can actually put it together through the contribution of companies like ours. So I see the trend in India, one, through these super innovation clusters, getting more and more technology which is relevant for India, whether it's battery technology, EV motor technology, or whatever, and also working with startups, working with large organizations as well to come out with relevant technologies in India. But I also see on the business side, people building business models which are not the traditional business models, and they actually build business models such as earn as you go. So they build a car, they've not even figured out how they're going to earn the money, but they're going to put these fleets in the market and pay all their suppliers, including people like us. So it's a very evolving space.
Correct. And also talking about innovation and really scaling up India's innovation quotient. One quick question in terms of what is also happening thanks to the disruption in the automotive industry and mobility sector. A lot of there's a wave of collaboration, which was earlier collaboration as a strategy was kind of exceptional, and gradually over the last, say, 5-10 years, it has become some kind of a norm, but now it's become absolute necessity. So what level of, how do you see this whole collaboration trend progressing, and what nature do you see the nature of collaboration between or among companies changing in the near to midterm?
I think the question you are asking is near to midterm. So I'm going to address this near to midterm. Today, at least in the electrification space, everything is subscale. People speak about huge volumes, but last year we sold 2,000 vehicles.
No single company has the critical volume yet.
Exactly. So I am seeing more and more, even OEMs are falling shy of a full investment, and there is far more amount of collaboration that they are doing, not only with Indian companies that are willing to put in their factories such as ourselves, but also with with companies earlier with China, but I see the trend switching over to companies either in Japan, Korea, or even other companies in India who are willing to put their bets on new technologies. So there's a lot of collaboration currently in the electrification space. The whole three-wheeler segment is entirely disorganized and unorganized, rather, not disorganized, unorganized. And it's, there are lots of little companies out there. You have companies like Sun Mobility, which are betting on swapping technology. You have lots of companies doing things together. In fact, we have currently two consortiums that we form, one with the IITs for technology and working with large organizations to actually try the technology out. The other one, more importantly, is this where we've got a connected partner for connected technology. We've got 3 or 4 large organizations giving us CAN information that we can use to integrate. We've got a company, a large organization that's giving us the glider, and we are providing the rest of the powertrain. So there's a lot of collaboration happening to finally come out with that electrified cars. And I see that trend increasing further to include universities and organizations that are smaller. Our entire supply chain is all Indian. It's all an Indian supply chain. Today, 85% of the product outside the battery is all Indian. So you can imagine the amount of collaboration. It's all subscale today. So in the near term, you'll see a lot of little collaborations, little acquisitions, projects that require multiple companies to deliver the final product.
Right.
In the longer term, I do see some consolidation happening.
Okay. Okay. Collaboration and perhaps some consolidation also. You and sorry. Yes.
Yeah, I just want to add, just now what Samir described is the exact reason why we would look for this innovation superclusters to be created more from a top-down approach, because that is the one that will actually facilitate with the government funding as required, creating a platform where industry, all the different players can come together. They will have membership, they will contribute, and together there could be like a joint laboratories, many things that are capital intensive thing that is very difficult for one company to do on its own can all be realized with a shared infrastructure available for the technology to evolve a lot faster. So that is the basis of this ask for innovation supercluster, and I hope we make some headway on that.
Right. So you are saying that like Make in India, like Atmanirbhar Bharat, there should be a vision and supported by action to facilitate this. Right.
Yes.
Right.
Let me give you one 30-second example.
Yes.
Okay. Today, all cars are trying to be charged through coal-based energy, through traditional energy. Now, wouldn't it be great if we created a supercluster innovation center where we talk about only alternative energy feeding the EVs? So what is that green to green energy pilots that we can do, which will transform the Indian requirements into a far more green solution? So not done yet, capital intensive, too difficult, charging station coming out, but it's all coal-based energy. So
right.
That's another example.
Right, that's well said, and that will also address the well-to-wheel argument, which is currently not in favor of it. Manu, I understand you have to leave very shortly, but quickly, we touched upon collaboration, we touched upon skilling. The common factor in both are universities, which also I think Samir touched upon. You yourself are an electronics engineer. How would you rate the current crop of engineers who really graduate from the universities? Many universities mushrooming, particularly in the south also. The quality, and is it up to the mark yet? Because that was one of the challenges still recently for the industry. And if not, what needs to be done? Action point.
I think I'm the junior most on the call, but still for more than the 2 decades that I've been here, we've been constantly talking about the gap in academia and industry readiness, if we may call, of new graduates that are coming out of universities. There's been a constant effort over the last more than 2 decades from various facets of the industry, starting from really mild efforts of going in and talking to people to the initial times when NASSCOM put together, syllabus for some electronics or software or embedded domain specific functions, went hand in hand with the autonomy that a lot of universities received meanwhile, that they had the freedom to take up all of these things and really implement them for us. So you see, there is a gradual increase happening in the so-called industry readiness when it comes to graduates that come out of Indian universities. Obviously, if there are new players on the block, then they take their time to get there. So it's not an instant recipe that is out there. We feel much better meanwhile, but it's still at least from an MBRDA perspective, even today, a 6-month wait after somebody comes in. I don't know what a Quest or a KPIT would experience, but at least a 6-month wait before you expose a certain talent on an international platform, right? And that's more than just technical knowledge, right? You're presenting India to the world. So you're talking about soft skills, etiquettes, communication skills, intercultural skills that are so much needed before you really expose some of these talent. Their programming is visible way before they physically are in many cases in an international setting or a platform. It's getting better and better. So that is one aspect of the academia where we think there's still some work to do. I think my colleagues on the call will resonate with that opinion. There's still work to do, but it's getting better, right? The intensification of the efforts between industry and academia is also very heartening to see. There's a proactive approach from a lot of these independent universities. They want a name for themselves. They want their talent industry ready. It's become a competitive edge between each other. So they've taken it much more seriously than in the past. Right? I have a lot of universities and enterprises that actually come running because they want you on their board, advising them on the syllabus they have. They want people from the industry to go and teach them, and it's not just one guest lecture or something. You handle an entire semester for some subjects, going in voluntarily or pro bono and doing it. And I think these are serious efforts that are going on. This is one thing. NASSCOM, has been working on the reskill and upskill initiative for a long time now, and that's a very commendable effort on the form of NASSCOM, on the part of NASSCOM, to bring, let's say, industry relevant topics and brand names back into the academia, helping them in a way to catch up with this gap. So that's how we see it right now.
Great. Manu, I know you have a call, but I don't know if you can hang on for a couple of minutes. We are about to wrap up this discussion. Before I come to my last question, Ajay and Kishore, your experiences, I mean, Manu shared his experience, your experiences in terms of the quality of engineers and who will really have kind of influenced the capability of the ER&D industry as a whole, contribute towards its capability or otherwise. So very briefly, your experience and then Ajay's.
Sumantra, can you excuse me? And Kishore, sorry for butting in. Can you excuse me because it is a global call? I cannot miss.
I can understand.
Will make fun of me on the German timing, but at 11 sharp.
I can understand. But thanks a lot. Always a pleasure talking to you.
For that. Thanks and enjoy talking. Thank you.
So, I mean, NASSCOM has been working for quite some time, but as I mentioned, specifically in the embedded software or some of the key area, I believe there is a much better depth required when the engineer comes in, and it takes still a lot of time to get him ready for the industry. So as many companies have done, I mean, we do have our own syllabuses which we introduce, and it becomes easy because you can keep things relevant as the market is moving. But little before the new education policy came up, I think we were lucky to have a very good collaboration with a couple of universities where we can actually run their courses in engineering along with that. So it gives us a much more time to prepare the talent and bring the domain as well as the detail exercise. So it's a pilot, I would say. Right now we are into that. But I do hope that the new policy, which is that, I mean, there is still some time to get it operationalized. But just because we have started already with some special permissions with that, I hope that will accelerate over the period, and that may help. That I would say.
Hey, what has been Questco Global's experience and your suggestion quickly?
Yeah, so Manu and Kishore really gave a very good narrative on how things have changed and improved for good over the years. And that same thing we have also experienced in the company, in terms of how it used to take maybe a year, maybe 10 years ago to now as little as 3 months of technical induction is good for getting people onto productive work. But I have a very philosophical little difference with even what we all have been complaining for last 20 years. I think the education university's job is to kind of create a workforce or a think force that is able to learn. And it's not their job to prepare a student for a job I have, because in my company I have like 2,000 new jobs, right? So they can't create one for each of the job that I have. So I don't expect them to do that. But what I would want universities to do is like create these people who can really on their own learn the next skill, because what I'm going to get them to do this year is going to be quite different 2 years from now. So that ability to learn and to tell me, who are those best students who have the learning ability that can quickly come in and do whatever is required is one of the aspects. The other is engineering is very much a passion oriented thing. If you have a very passionate engineer doing what they love to do, lot better engineering happens versus just kind of taking one person, shape them in a certain way, put them in a certain job, right? And we have seen that. So I would like good engineers to come in, little bit explore within the company first, some months of the time, and kind of see what is it that they like, and then they go into that rather than the university to create somebody that I'm going to put on a job right away. Okay, so I have a very different feeling about this. This has been an easy topic. Industry as it has become fashionable to just keep talking about how this is not working between the academia and all that. I think it's much more like Kishore said. He has for their need created certain university relationship, and those university relationship then right from the beginning find those engineers who are interested in that kind of thing, and then they come in is the better model rather than a broad brush of every university trying to create industry people.
Right, Ted. And as we have seen in the West also, the kind of industry academia collaboration has really yielded into great benefits, mutual benefits, both for the industry, which they can commercialize, and for the academia also to kind of fine tune their approach, which will which can actually yield benefits beyond the labs. So I can good to see
that requires that one-to-one connection.
One-to-one connection.
By the industry to pick certain universities.
Right, and
contribute it back, and that's what sources people is the best model. And what Kishore is doing is the best model.
Right, and it's good to see KPIT taking such initiatives. Maybe, Kishore, I would like to have another discussion with you on another day on this and on this whole industry academia collaboration. And I think there is a lot of scope. Independently, the needs are there in the industry, the capabilities are there in the academia. I think they just need to marry each other and kind of create fantastic innovations, and out of which the Indian ER&D industry will also stand to benefit. Last words, gentlemen, in 10 seconds maybe from each one of you. If I'm not wrong, the global opportunity for ER&D stands at about 1.5 trillion US dollars. Correct me if I'm wrong. And if it's correct, what kind of scope or how much of it can the Indian industry expect to kind of capture, and how? Going first with Mr. Vishwanathan, very briefly, please.
No, as Samir and Ajay pointed out earlier, we had a council meeting where the leaders have taken a very ambitious goal, where the 1.5 trillion also grows at 6 to 7%. Outsourcing grows by, say, 35 to 40%. Industry continues to grow at, say, 11 to 12%. I think this industry will do injustice to its potential if it does not generate $75 to $100 billion of revenue. $66, $70 of billions of revenue would happen by the natural growth which is happening currently that's taking place. I'm talking about, say, 70-80 years time frame. It will do injustice to its potential if it doesn't hit the triple-digit mark. That is a goal we should do it. How should we do it? I think everything you talked about. And coincidentally, whatever point you talked about, whatever point Ajay, Samir, Manu and Kishore talked about, they're all the strategies what the ER&D Council is working on to inch towards a $100 billion mark in 70-80 years time.
That's good to know, and best wishes with the efforts. Ajay, next, your thoughts.
Yeah, so KSV said that right. Just want to clarify, the 1.5 trillion is the total ER&D spend.
Correct.
Of that, currently about 100 billion is being offshore, from which we have 32 billion. And this 32 billion is what we are trying to achieve, 100 billion in the 7 to 8 year time frame that KSV talked about. And I think all the things are getting aligned. I am looking forward to this innovation super clusters to take off, which will pretty much guarantee that for us. If that were to happen, it would guarantee that goal for us.
Samir, I think that the innovation superclusters will really have to have a lot of responsibility and to deliver on this, right?
My final words are exactly the same as KSV and Ajay, that if we have to reach 100, and we will, $100 billion, we will see Indian products that will dominate at least developing markets, if not developed markets, we will see a lot of super cluster innovation clusters, at least 5-6 of them, focused ones. And we will see Indian engineers not only leading organizations worldwide, which is already happening, but building the best products in the market for world applications.
Right. Thank you. Last words from Kishore. You already have set up recently a tech center in Munich. I guess you're already kind of making some inroads in the global space. So your last words, please.
So absolutely, I think there is that opportunity, and I guess the way to address that is multiple way. One is, of course, what other gentlemen have mentioned. Other thing, I think the change in the business models will also help to accelerate that. I think that's the only thing I would add to what my other colleagues have mentioned.
Hey, on that note, thank you very much, gentlemen. We have overshot the time, but that also shows how critical and how interesting this whole theme is. And the Indian software industry has really made its mark in the global world, and within it and independently, the Indian ER&D industry is on its way to create its space in the global stage and really make a mark with a lot of cutting-edge innovations and technologies. So wishing you all the very best, and all the industry players who would be industry professionals who would be watching this program, this discussion. Indeed, it was a pleasure and honor for me to host it, and as always, best wishes to everyone in the industry on behalf of the Autocar Professional, and wishing you everyone good health, safety, and absolute success. On that note, thank you very much, gentlemen, for this discussion. Really appreciate it, and wish you all the best.
Now, I really wish and hope the next time we have a summit, we have a women leader also in the game.
Yes, yeah, we will do that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sumantra.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Shore. Bye, Samir.
Thanks.
Ajay, thank you. Kishore, thank you. Samir, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.